Hi, I'm Zoe. 3 weeks ago, my stepmother stood in front of my advanced literature teacher and declared, "She's not my real child, so I don't see why her grades matter to me." What she didn't know was that Ms. Vasquez had been watching me with the kind of careful attention that goes beyond professional duty. What none of us knew was why. This morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Patricia, begging me to come home. Funny how quickly not real becomes desperately needed when your perfect world starts cracking. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room B buzzed like angry wasps as I sat in the plastic chair that seemed designed to make teenagers feel smaller. Patricia had insisted on scheduling this parent-teacher meeting during 6th period, which meant missing advanced literature. Ironically, the only class where I felt like I belonged. She sat across from Ms. Elena Vasquez, my teacher, with that particular brand of forced patience she reserved for obligations involving me. Ms. Vasquez had been trying to explain my essay on identity and belonging, the one that had earned an A+ and a note suggesting I submit it to the state writing competition. Patricia's manicured fingers drummed against the table, while her eyes wandered to her phone screen. The disconnect was painful to watch, like two people speaking entirely different languages. "Zoe has exceptional talent," Ms. Vasquez was saying, her voice carrying that warm authority that made even the rowdiest seniors pay attention. Her insight into complex themes is remarkable for someone her age. She writes with a kind of emotional depth that suggests real experience with loss and resilience. I felt my cheeks flush. Ms. Vasquez had always seen something in my writing that others missed, encouraging me to dig deeper into the painful places where the best words lived. She'd been the first teacher to suggest that my experiences, the messy, complicated feelings about family and belonging, were actually strengths, not weaknesses to hide. Patricia shifted in her seat, finally looking up from her phone. "That's nice, but let's be realistic here. Zoe's always been overly dramatic. She writes these sad stories because she thinks it gets her attention." The words hit like a slap, casual and dismissive. I mean, she's not even my real child, so I don't see why her grades matter to me. David handles all that school stuff. The silence that followed felt like the moment after lightning strikes when you're waiting for the thunder. Ms. Vasquez's face went perfectly still, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, then something deeper. Pain, maybe. Or recognition of a different kind. "Excuse me?" Ms. Vasquez's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I care about Zoe, of course. But she's David's daughter from his previous marriage. Her mother died when she was little, and honestly, I think that's where all this dark writing comes from. She never got over it. I wanted to disappear into the institutional carpet." This was Patricia at her most casually cruel. Not screaming or dramatic, just stating what she saw as facts. That I was damaged goods. That my grief was inconvenient. That my presence in her perfect life was something to be managed, not celebrated. But Ms. Vasquez was staring at Patricia like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Her mother died. Car accident. Zoe was 3. Patricia checked her phone again. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but let's not pretend this writing thing is going anywhere. Zoe needs to focus on practical subjects. Maybe she can be a nurse or something stable." I'd heard variations of this speech for 3 years, ever since Patricia married Dad and decided my dreams were too expensive and too impractical. But hearing it in front of Ms. Vasquez, the one person who believed in my words, felt like being publicly stripped bare. Ms. Vasquez set down her pen with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, professional, but underneath I could hear something volcanic. "Mrs. Caldwell, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Zoe's writing isn't just good for a high school student. It's exceptional by any standard. She has the kind of raw talent that colleges fight over." "Well, that's lovely," Patricia said, standing up and smoothing her pencil skirt. "But talent doesn't pay the bills. Zoe needs to be realistic about her future." She gathered her purse and car keys, already mentally checked out. "I'm sure you understand." Ms. Vasquez stood too, and for a moment, the two women faced each other across the small table. My teacher was several inches shorter than Patricia, but somehow she seemed to take up more space. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, I don't understand. At all. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by public school teachers who she assumed would defer to her authority as the parent. Excuse me? I don't understand how someone could look at a child, any child in their care, and see limitation instead of possibility. I don't understand how someone could stand in the way of a young person's dreams instead of nurturing them. Ms. Vasquez's voice remained steady, but her words carried weight. Most of all, I don't understand how someone could refer to the child they're raising as not real and think that's acceptable. The air in the room felt charged. Patricia's face flushed red, her composure finally cracking. I don't appreciate being lectured by someone who sees these kids for 6 hours a week. I live with the reality of raising a teenager who's been traumatized. It's not as simple as you make it sound. You're right, Ms. Vasquez said quietly. I don't know what it's like to raise Zoe day to day, but I know what it's like to lose a mother. And I know what it's like to have the people who should protect you treat your pain like an inconvenience. Something in her tone made both Patricia and me look at her more closely. There was a personal edge to her words, a rawness that went beyond professional concern. Patricia seemed to sense she'd lost control of the conversation. Well, I think we're done here. She turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. Zoe, you can walk home today. I have a hair appointment. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her expensive perfume and the echo of her dismissal. I sat in the plastic chair, staring at my hands, wishing I could evaporate. Ms. Vasquez slowly sat back down. Zoe, look at me. I raised my eyes reluctantly, expecting to see pity. Instead, I found something unexpected, a fierce protectiveness that reminded me of how lionesses look when they're defending their cubs. What she said about you, about your writing, about your future, none of that is true. Do you hear me? I nodded, but my throat felt too tight to speak. You are real. Your feelings are real, your talent is real, and your dreams matter. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. For a moment, I almost believed her. Ms. Vasquez had always been different from other teachers. More invested, more personal in her attention. She remembered details about my life that I'd mentioned in essays months earlier. She'd lent me books from her personal collection, novels by authors who wrote about complicated families and girls who felt like outsiders in their own lives. Can I ask you something? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course. Why do you care so much? About me, I mean. The question felt dangerous, like it might reveal something I wasn't ready to know. Ms. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions flicker across her face. Sadness, longing, something that looked almost like grief. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. Because every child deserves at least one person who sees their worth, who believes in their potential, who fights for their dreams. She paused, and when she continued, there was something almost vulnerable in her tone. And because you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who deserved better than she got. The way she said it made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. There was something about Ms. Vasquez that had always felt familiar, like recognizing a song you'd heard in a dream. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way she unconsciously twisted her dark hair around her finger when she was grading papers. The way she seemed to understand the loneliness in my writing without me having to explain it. But before I could ask more questions, the bell rang, signaling the end of 6th period. Students' voices filled the hallway, and the spell was broken. I should get to class, I said, gathering my backpack. Zoe. She stood up, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something else, something important. Instead, she just squeezed my shoulder gently. Remember what I said. You matter. I walked home that afternoon through the tree-lined streets of Maple Creek subdivision, replaying the conference in my mind. Patricia's words stung, but they weren't surprising. What surprised me was the intensity of Ms. Vasquez's reaction, the personal edge to her defense of me. Most teachers would have made polite noises about supporting all their students and left it at that. The house was empty when I got home. Patricia at her hair appointment, Dad still at the insurance office where he worked long hours to pay for Patricia's lifestyle upgrades. I climbed the stairs to my room, a converted guest bedroom that still felt temporary after 3 years. The walls were painted a generic beige, and Patricia had insisted I couldn't hang anything that would damage the resale value. My books were stacked in neat piles on the floor because the bookshelf was in the master bedroom, repurposed for Patricia's extensive collection of self-help and lifestyle magazines. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media without really seeing it. Patricia's Instagram was full of carefully curated photos of her perfect life: brunch with girlfriends, shopping trips, romantic dinners with Dad. I appeared in exactly 3 photos from the past year, always slightly out of focus, always at the edge of the frame.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The captions never mentioned me by name. Family dinner or beautiful evening, but never my stepdaughter or even just Zoe. That night at dinner, Dad asked about the parent conference, with the distracted attention of someone going through the motions. Patricia served his plate first, then her own, then remembered to get mine. "How did it go?" Dad asked, cutting into his grilled chicken. "Fine," Patricia said, not looking at me. "The teacher thinks Zoe's writing is good. I told her she needs to focus on more practical subjects." Dad nodded absently. He'd stopped fighting Patricia's opinions about my future months ago, worn down by her constant insistence that I was too sensitive and unrealistic about my goals. It was easier to let her manage the parts of parenting that required conflict. "Ms. Vasquez thinks I should submit my essay to a state competition," I said quietly. Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "We've talked about this, Zoe. You need to be realistic. It's just a competition. It doesn't cost anything. It costs time and energy that could be spent on something useful." Patricia's voice carried that edge of annoyance she got when I pushed back. "You're going to be 17 next month. You need to start thinking about practical career paths." Dad looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. "Maybe we could look at the competition requirements," he offered weakly. "David." Patricia's tone was sharp enough to make him flinch. "We've discussed this. Zoe needs structure, not false hope." I excused myself and went upstairs, closing my bedroom door and leaning against it. The house felt smaller every day, like the walls were slowly moving inward. Patricia had made it clear that my presence was temporary, something to be endured until I turned 18 and could be encouraged to find my own place. Later that night, I pulled out my laptop and opened the essay Ms. Vasquez had praised. It was about the difference between houses and homes, about feeling like a guest in your own life. I'd written it thinking about the sharp contrast between my memories of early childhood, fuzzy but warm, filled with bedtime stories and gentle hands braiding my hair, and the careful politeness of my current existence. I'd titled it The Space Between Belonging, and reading it now, I could see why Ms. Vasquez had been so encouraging. The writing was honest in a way that made my chest ache. It captured something true about the particular loneliness of being raised by people who saw you as an obligation rather than a gift. But it also captured something else, a longing for connection that went deeper than teenage angst. There was a thread running through the essay about the mysterious nature of love, about how some people could look at you and see your soul while others saw only the inconvenience of your existence. As I reread my own words, I thought about Ms. Vasquez's reaction to Patricia's casual cruelty. The way her face had changed when Patricia mentioned my mother's death. The fierce protectiveness in her voice when she'd defended my dreams. I opened a new document and started typing a thank you email to her, but the words felt inadequate. How do you thank someone for seeing you when everyone else looks through you? How do you express gratitude for being treated like you matter when you'd almost forgotten what that felt like? In the end, I deleted the draft and closed the laptop. Some things were too big for words, even for someone who'd been told she had a gift for them. But as I lay in bed that night listening to the muffled sounds of Patricia and Dad's evening routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during that parent conference. Something in the way Ms. Vasquez had looked at me, like she was seeing not just my potential, but something deeper, something that felt almost like recognition. The next morning I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Patricia's tone was sharp with frustration, and Dad's responses were defensive and tired. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm was familiar. Another argument about money, or schedules, or the various ways I was making their lives more complicated. I dressed quickly and grabbed my backpack, hoping to slip out before they drew me into whatever crisis was unfolding. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, Patricia appeared in the hallway, already dressed for her job at the high-end boutique where she worked part-time. More for social status than financial necessity. "Zoe, I need you to stay after school today. The carpet cleaners are coming, and someone needs to let them in." "I have tutoring at the library," I said. It wasn't entirely true. I'd been planning to work on college application essays. But Patricia didn't need to know that. "Cancel it. This is more important." Dad emerged from the kitchen, straightening his tie and avoiding eye contact. The dynamic was clear. Patricia made the decisions, and he implemented them with minimal resistance. "Can't you just give them a key?" I asked. Patricia's eyes flashed with irritation. "They're not getting a key to my house. You'll be here by 3:30, and you'll wait until they're finished." End of discussion. I wanted to point out that it was my house, too, that I'd lived here longer than she had. But the expression on her face warned me that pushing back would only make things worse. At school, I found myself looking forward to advanced literature with an intensity that surprised me. Ms. Vasquez had always been my favorite teacher, but after yesterday's conference, I felt a new kind of connection to her. She'd stood up for me in a way that no adult had done in years. When I walked into her classroom, she looked up from her desk and smiled. Not the professional smile she gave most students, but something warmer, more personal. "Good morning, Zoe. How are you feeling after yesterday?" The question caught me off guard. Most adults asked how you were doing as a social nicety, not because they actually wanted an answer. But Ms. Vasquez was watching me with genuine concern, waiting for a real response. "I'm okay," I said, then added more honestly. Patricia wasn't very happy about the conversation. Ms. Vasquez's expression darkened slightly. "I'm sorry if that caused problems for you at home." "It's not your fault." Patricia doesn't like it when people disagree with her. Other students were filtering into the classroom, so Ms. Vasquez lowered her voice. "Zoe, I want you to know that what I said yesterday wasn't just teacher encouragement. You have real talent. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." There was something in her tone that made me study her face more carefully. She was younger than Patricia, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair that she usually kept in a neat bun and brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. She wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and I'd never heard her mention a family. For a teacher who encouraged us to write about our personal lives, she was remarkably private about her own. "Ms. Vasquez," I said impulsively, "can I ask you something personal?" She paused in organizing her lesson plans. "Of course. Yesterday, when Patricia was talking about my mother, you seemed, I don't know, like it meant something to you. More than just teacher sympathy." For a moment, her carefully composed expression wavered. I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise. Then, what looked almost like panic. "I suppose," she said carefully, "that I have strong feelings about children who've lost parents. It's a particular kind of loss that's hard for others to understand." The way she said it suggested personal experience, but before I could ask more questions, the bell rang and the rest of the class settled into their seats. That day's lesson was on family dynamics in literature, which felt almost cruelly ironic. We were discussing the difference between biological families and chosen families, about how the people who raise you aren't always the people who understand you best. Can anyone think of examples from your own reading where a character finds belonging outside their biological family? Ms. Vasquez asked. Hands went up around the room, students eager to discuss the books they'd read. But I found myself thinking about the question in more personal terms. When had I last felt like I truly belonged somewhere? The answer came to me with uncomfortable clarity, here in this classroom, discussing ideas with someone who valued my thoughts. With Ms. Vasquez, who listened to my opinions about books like they mattered, who saw potential in my writing that even I sometimes doubted. After class, I lingered as other students filed out. Ms. Vasquez looked up from her desk expectantly. I've been thinking about what you said, I began, about submitting my essay to the competition. Her face lit up. And? I want to do it, but I don't think Patricia will support it. Ms. Vasquez set down her pen and gave me her full attention. Zoe, sometimes we have to pursue our dreams, despite the people who should be supporting us. It's not ideal, but it's not impossible either. Easy for you to say, I said, then immediately felt bad for the bitter tone. Sorry, I just mean, you don't know what it's like living with someone who thinks your dreams are stupid. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know what your specific situation is like. But I do know what it's like to feel unsupported, to feel like the people who should love you unconditionally have conditions you can never meet. There was something raw in her voice that made me look at her more closely. For just a moment, the professional mask slipped, and I saw something vulnerable underneath. Can I tell you something? She continued. When I was your age, I felt like I was living in a house where I was tolerated, but not wanted, where my dreams were seen as inconvenient and impractical. It took me years to realize that the problem wasn't with my dreams. It was with the people who couldn't see their value. The parallel was so close to my own experience that it took my breath away. What did you do? I found other people who believed in me. Teachers, friends, mentors who saw what my family couldn't or wouldn't see. And eventually, I built a life that honored the person I really was, not the person others wanted me to be. We looked at each other across her desk, and I felt that strange sense of recognition again, like looking in a mirror that reflected not just your appearance but your soul. Ms. Vasquez, I said slowly, can I ask you something else? She nodded. Do you have kids? The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her face went pale, and for a moment she just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. No, she said finally, and her voice sounded hollow. No, I don't. But the way she said it suggested a story more complicated than simple choice. There was loss in her voice, and longing, and something that sounded almost like regret. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Then Ms. Vasquez seemed to shake herself back to the present. I should let you get to your next class, she said, busying herself with papers. I gathered my things slowly, reluctant to leave. There was something happening here, some connection that felt important, but I couldn't name it. As I reached the door, she called my name. Zoe? I turned back. If you decide to submit that essay, I'll help you with the application, whatever you need. Even if Patricia doesn't approve? Ms. Vasquez met my eyes steadily, especially then. I walked to my next class with her words echoing in my mind. There had been something almost fierce in the way she'd said it, like a promise or a vow. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of ordinary classes and ordinary interactions. But underneath the routine, I felt something shifting. Ms. Vasquez's support felt different from the casual encouragement teachers sometimes offered. It felt personal, invested, like she had her own reasons for wanting to see me succeed. After school, I dutifully went home to wait for the carpet cleaners, spending the afternoon in my room with the door closed while strangers moved through the house below. Patricia came home around 5, inspecting their work with the critical eye of someone who expected perfection. At dinner, she was in an unusually good mood, chatting about her day at the boutique and the plans she was making for redecorating the living room. Dad listened with the patient attention of someone who'd learned that his opinions weren't really required. Oh, Zoe, Patricia said as she served dessert. I got a call from your guidance counselor today. Something about college applications? My stomach dropped. What about them? She said you've been asking about schools with strong creative writing programs. Patricia's tone was light, but there was an edge underneath. I told her we'd discuss this, and you're planning to focus on more practical majors. You did what? I stared at her in disbelief. I saved you from making a mistake, Patricia said calmly. Mrs. Henderson was very understanding when I explained your tendency toward unrealistic goals. Dad looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He'd abdicated responsibility for my future to Patricia months ago, claiming she was better at handling the details. Those aren't unrealistic goals, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Ms. Vasquez thinks. Ms. Vasquez doesn't have to pay for your college education, Patricia interrupted. We do. And we're not throwing money away on a degree that won't lead to a stable career. The conversation devolved from there, with Patricia laying out her vision of my future: community college, practical major, maybe nursing or teaching if I insisted on something helping-oriented. My dreams of studying creative writing, of maybe working as a journalist or novelist, were dismissed as childish fantasies. I went to bed that night feeling like the walls of my room were closing in. Patricia had effectively cut off my path to the future I wanted, and Dad was too conflict-averse to intervene. I felt trapped, powerless, like a character in one of the dystopian novels we read in English class. But as I lay in the dark, I thought about Ms. Vasquez's promise to help with the essay competition, about the way she'd looked when she said she'd support me even if Patricia didn't approve, about the raw emotion in her voice when she'd talked about feeling unwanted in her own home. Something was building inside me. Not rebellion exactly, but a quiet determination. Maybe I couldn't control what Patricia told my guidance counselor, or how she tried to shape my future. But I could control my own actions. I could decide which dreams were worth fighting for. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I wouldn't have to fight alone. The following Monday brought the kind of autumn rain that made Riverside feel smaller and grayer than usual. I walked into advanced literature with my essay clutched in my backpack, the 1 megasecond. Vasquez had encouraged me to submit to the state competition. I'd spent the weekend revising it, polishing every sentence until it gleamed with the kind of honesty that made my chest tight. Ms. Vasquez was at her desk when I arrived, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of its usual neat bun. She looked up when I entered, and I noticed she seemed tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Good morning, Zoe. You look determined about something. I approached her desk cautiously. The classroom was empty. I'd arrived 10 minutes early specifically to have this conversation without an audience. I decided to submit my essay, I said, pulling the printed pages from my backpack. You said you'd help with the application. Her face transformed, exhaustion replaced by genuine joy. Zoe, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you for making this choice. The way she said it made something warm unfurl in my chest. I couldn't remember the last time someone had said they were proud of me with such obvious sincerity. I haven't told Patricia yet, I admitted. I thought maybe if I got it submitted first, it would be harder for her to make me withdraw it. Ms. Vasquez studied my face carefully. Are you prepared for her reaction? Probably not. But you said sometimes we have to pursue our dreams despite the people who should be supporting us. I did say that. She smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. Come by after school today. We'll work on the application together. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of ordinary classes, but I felt different somehow, like I was carrying a secret that made me stronger. During lunch, my best friend Iris noticed the change immediately. You're practically glowing, she said, unwrapping her sandwich. What happened? Did Patricia finally agree to let you apply to those writing programs? Iris was one of the few people who understood my complicated home situation. Her own parents were loving but chaotic, the kind of people who forgot to buy groceries but remembered to ask about her dreams. She'd never quite understood Patricia's militant practicality. Not exactly, I said, then explained about the essay competition and Ms. Vasquez's offer to help. Iris raised an eyebrow. That's amazing, but also kind of intense. I mean, Ms. Vasquez is great, but she seems really invested in you specifically. More than most teachers. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing Iris voice it made me defensive. She just believes in my writing. I'm not saying it's bad, Iris said quickly. "It's just unusual. Like, my mom always says teachers who go the extra mile usually have their own reasons." Her words stayed with me through the afternoon. By the time I made it to Ms. Vasquez's classroom after the final bell, I was buzzing with nervous energy and unasked questions. Ms. Vasquez had spread the application materials across her desk like she was preparing for surgery. The state writing competition was prestigious, the kind of thing that could open doors to scholarships and college programs. Looking at the requirements, I felt a flutter of doubt. "This is really competitive," I said, scanning the list of previous winners. "That's exactly why you should enter," Ms. Vasquez replied. "You belong in that company, Zoe. Your writing has the kind of emotional authenticity that judges remember." We spent the next hour crafting the application, Ms. Vasquez helping me refine my personal statement and organize the supporting materials. She had a gift for asking questions that drew out the best parts of my thinking, pushing me to articulate why my story mattered. "Tell me about this line," she said, pointing to a passage in my essay about the difference between being loved and being tolerated. "What were you thinking when you wrote it?" I read the sentence aloud. "Love sees your flaws and chooses you anyway. Tolerance counts your imperfections like debt." "I was thinking about my stepmother," I said honestly. "How she keeps track of everything I do wrong, like she's building a case for why I don't deserve to be there." Ms. Vasquez went very still. "That must be incredibly lonely." "It is, but it's also clarifying, in a weird way. It makes you understand the difference between people who see you as a burden and people who see you as a gift." "And which am I?" The question slipped out before she seemed to realize she was asking it. I looked at her in surprise. "You see me as a gift, obviously. You're the only adult in my life who treats my dreams like they matter." Something shifted in her expression. Relief, maybe, mixed with something deeper. "You matter, Zoe, not just your dreams. You." The intensity of her statement hung between us. I found myself studying her face, looking for clues to explain the personal edge to her investment in me. She had high cheekbones and expressive eyes, and there was something about the shape of her mouth that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. "Ms. Vasquez," I said carefully, "can I ask you something that might be too personal?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "Yesterday, when you said you knew what it was like to feel unwanted, were you talking about your own family?" For a long moment she didn't answer. She stared at the essay in front of us, her fingers twisting the pen she was holding. "My childhood was complicated," she said finally. "I was raised by people who loved me but couldn't keep me, and then by people who kept me but didn't love me. The parallel to my own experience was so close it made my throat tight." "Foster care?" "Something like that." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I spent a lot of years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was always auditioning for a place in other people's lives." I thought about her earlier comment about not having children and wondered if her past had shaped her present in ways I was only beginning to understand. "Is that why you became a teacher? To help kids who feel the same way?" She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Partly, and partly because I know what it's like to have talent that no one recognizes. To have dreams that feel impossible because no one believes in them." We finished the application in companionable silence, both lost in our own thoughts. As I prepared to leave, Ms. Vasquez handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open this now," she said, "but if Patricia reacts badly to the application, if you need a reminder of why your dreams matter, read it then." I tucked the envelope into my backpack, curious but trusting her instincts about timing. At home, I found Patricia in the kitchen, aggressively organizing the spice cabinet with the kind of energy that suggested she was working through frustration. "How was school?" she asked without looking up. "Fine." I submitted an essay to a writing competition. Her hands stilled on the cumin jar. "Excuse me? The state competition Ms. Vasquez told you about." I decided to enter. Patricia turned around slowly, her face cycling through surprise, annoyance, and finally settling on cold anger. "I thought we discussed this." "You discussed it. I listened. But it's my future, and I think I should have a say in it." It was the most direct challenge I'd ever made to her authority, and we both knew it. Patricia set down the spice jar with deliberate care. "Zoe, I know you think I'm the villain in your story, but I'm trying to protect you from disappointment. Writing competitions, creative programs, they're designed to take advantage of naive kids who think talent is enough. What if it is enough? What if I'm actually good at this? Then you'll be a very talented person working at a coffee shop because you chose passion over practicality. Dad chose that moment to come home from work, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. He took one look at our faces and sighed. What's the argument about this time? Your daughter, Patricia said, emphasizing the word like it was evidence of his failure, has submitted an essay to some writing competition against my explicit instructions. Dad looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd refereed too many of these fights. Is it expensive? No, I said quickly. It doesn't cost anything to enter. Then what's the harm? He directed the question to Patricia, but his tone suggested he already knew he was choosing the wrong side. The harm is false hope. The harm is encouraging unrealistic expectations. Patricia's voice was rising, her careful composure cracking. I'm trying to raise a responsible adult, not an entitled dreamer. She's 17, Patricia. Let her dream a little. It was the most support Dad had offered me in months, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe he was finally ready to stand up to Patricia's relentless practicality. But Patricia's face had gone cold. Fine. When she's living in our basement at 25 because her English degree didn't prepare her for the real world. Remember that you encouraged this. She stalked out of the kitchen, leaving Dad and me in uncomfortable silence. I'm sorry, he said finally. She means well. No, she doesn't. The words came out harder than I'd intended. She means to control me. There's a difference. Dad flinched. Zoe, Patricia loves you in her own way. What way is that exactly? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like toleration mixed with resentment. She's had to adjust to a lot. Taking on a teenager wasn't part of her original plan. I stared at him, wondering when he'd started defending Patricia's right to resent my existence. I wasn't part of my original plan either, Dad. But I'm here, and I'm your daughter, and maybe she could try acting like that matters. He rubbed his forehead, a gesture I recognized from my childhood. Dad trying to navigate emotional territory he didn't understand. Can we just try to keep the peace, for everyone's sake? It was a familiar request, the same one he'd been making for 3 years. Keep the peace by making myself smaller, by wanting less, by pretending Patricia's casual cruelty was just a personality quirk we all had to accommodate. Sure, Dad. I'll keep the peace. But even as I said it, I knew something had changed. I'd crossed a line by submitting the essay, and there was no going back. That night, I lay in bed staring at the envelope Ms. Vasquez had given me. Patricia's reaction had been exactly what I'd expected. Disappointment mixed with anger at my defiance. But her words had stung more than usual, maybe because part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe I was being naive to think my dreams were worth pursuing. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on personal stationery, the kind with someone's initials embossed at the top. But the initials weren't EVV for Elena Vasquez. They were EVC. The note was brief but powerful. Zoe, years from now, when you're living the life you dreamed of, you'll understand that the people who tried to make you smaller were reflecting their own limitations, not yours. Your talent is real. Your dreams are valid. And you deserve love that celebrates who you are, not love that requires you to be someone else. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Elena. But it was the postscript that made my breath catch. P.S. Sometimes the people who believe in us most are the ones who've walked similar paths. Trust your instincts. I read the note 3 times, each time focusing on different details. The careful handwriting that looked somehow familiar. The way she'd signed it with just her first name, like we were equals, rather than teacher and student. The mysterious initials on the stationery. Most of all, I thought about that postscript. Trust your instincts. But my instincts were telling me something that seemed impossible. Something that would explain the personal intensity of Ms. Vasquez's investment in me. I pulled out my laptop and opened a search engine. typing in various combinations of Elena Vasquez and Riverside High School. Most of the results were generic faculty directory listings, a few mentions in the school newsletter. But then I found something interesting, a newspaper article from 2 years ago about new teachers joining the district. Elena Vasquez Caldwell joins Riverside High School's English department after completing her master's degree in education at Portland State. Ms. Caldwell specializes in contemporary literature and creative writing pedagogy. Caldwell, not Vasquez, Caldwell, my last name. My hands were shaking as I searched for more information. Elena Caldwell didn't return many results, but Elena Vasquez did. And buried in the search results was something that made my world tilt sideways. A memorial website for accident victims from 17 years ago. A brief mention of Elena Vasquez, age 15, who survived a car accident that killed her mother, Maria Vasquez. But that would make her 32 now, not the early 30s I'd estimated. And it would mean I closed the laptop and stared at the wall, my mind racing. The math didn't work unless she'd had her name legally changed. Unless Elena Vasquez had become Elena Caldwell, for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I thought about every interaction I'd had with Ms. Vasquez, looking for clues I might have missed. The way she knew details about my writing that I'd never explicitly told her. The way she seemed to understand my relationship with Patricia without me having to explain it. The intensity of her reaction when Patricia had dismissed my dreams. Most tellingly, I thought about her answer when I'd asked if she had children. The way the question had seemed to physically hurt her. The hollow tone when she'd said no. What if the answer wasn't no? What if the answer was more complicated? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my dad's sister, Aunt Janet. She lived in Seattle now, but she'd been close to our family when I was little. If anyone would know the truth about my mother's death, it would be her. My finger hovered over her number. It was late, but Janet had always been a night owl. More importantly, she was the kind of person who believed kids deserved honest answers to difficult questions. I pressed call. Zoe? Honey, is everything okay? Janet's voice was concerned but warm. I'm fine. I have some questions about my mom. About the accident. There was a pause. What kind of questions? Dad always told me she died instantly, that there were no other survivors. But I found something online that suggests that might not be true. Another pause, longer this time. Zoe, why are you researching this now? Because I think I might have met someone who was there, someone who survived. Janet was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. Your father asked me never to tell you this. He thought it would be too painful. But your mother wasn't alone in that car, sweetie. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Who else was there? Your half-sister. Your mom's daughter from her first marriage. She was 14 when it happened, and she was thrown from the car. Spent months in the hospital. The room seemed to spin around me. What was her name? Elena. Elena Vasquez. I dropped the phone. When I picked it up again, Janet was calling my name frantically. I'm here, I whispered. Zoe, honey, are you okay? I shouldn't have told you like this. Your father is going to kill me. Where is she now, Elena? I don't know. After she recovered, she went to live with relatives. Your father tried to stay in touch, but her family thought it was better for everyone if they made a clean break. Too many painful memories. But she's my sister. Your half-sister, yes. And according to your father, she adored you. You were just 3, but she used to carry you everywhere, read you stories, braid your hair. The memories came flooding back. Not clear images, but feelings. Gentle hands, soft voice, someone who made me feel safe and loved. I'd always assumed those memories were of my mother. Janet, what did Elena look like? Dark hair, brown eyes. She looked a lot like your mother. Why? I couldn't answer. I couldn't explain that I'd been looking at those same dark hair and brown eyes every day in advanced literature class. That the gentle hands I remembered had been grading my papers and encouraging my dreams. I have to go, I said. Zoe, wait. You can't tell your father we talked about this. He made me promise. I hung up and sat in the silence of my room, trying to process what I'd just learned. Elena Vasquez was my half-sister. She'd survived the accident that killed our mother. She'd been caring for me when I was little, and now, somehow, she was caring for me again. But why hadn't she told me? Why the pretense of being just my teacher? I thought about Patricia's words at the parent conference. She's not my real child. The irony was overwhelming. Patricia had been so determined to establish that I wasn't really hers, never knowing that my actual family member was sitting right across from her. The next morning, I walked into advanced literature with a dozen questions burning on my tongue. Ms. Vasquez, Elena, looked up when I entered, and for the first time I saw the resemblance Janet had mentioned. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. "Good morning, Zoe. How did Patricia react to the application?" I stood at her desk, studying her face. "About as well as you'd expect. But I have a different question." She looked up from her lesson plans, something in my tone making her alert. "What's your real name?" The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, might maintain the fiction that had somehow brought us back together. But then her shoulders sagged, and I saw the weight of years of secrets settling on her. "Elena Vasquez Caldwell," she said quietly, though I haven't used Vasquez professionally since I moved back to Oregon. "You're my sister." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Half-sister," she corrected, then immediately looked stricken. "Not that it matters. You're my sister in every way that counts." Other students were starting to filter into the classroom, so she stood up quickly. "Can you stay after class? We need to talk." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The rest of the class period passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on the discussion of symbolism in contemporary fiction when my entire understanding of my life had just been rewritten. Elena kept glancing at me throughout the lesson, her professional composure intact, but her eyes filled with anxiety. When the bell rang and the last student left, she closed the door and leaned against it like she was bracing for impact. "How did you find out?" I told her about the late-night phone call with Janet, about the internet searches and the inconsistencies I'd noticed. As I spoke, I watched her face cycle through relief, fear, and something that looked like grief. "I've wanted to tell you since the first day you walked into my classroom," she said when I finished. "But I was terrified." "Of what?" "Of disrupting your life. Of making things more complicated with Patricia and your father. Of you hating me for abandoning you. You didn't abandon me. You were 14 and traumatized. You were a kid yourself." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I tried to fight to keep you. After I got out of the hospital, I begged my aunt to let me bring you with us. But your father had already married Patricia, and everyone said you needed stability, not a teenage sister who was still dealing with her own trauma." I thought about the years I'd spent feeling like an outsider in my own home, wondering why Patricia's love felt so conditional. All that time, my real family had been grieving my absence too. "Why did you come back to Riverside? Why become my teacher?" I'd been teaching in Portland for 3 years when I saw the job posting here. I told myself it was just a good opportunity, but honestly, I needed to know you were okay. I needed to see the person you'd become. "And?" She smiled through her tears. "You're extraordinary, Zoe. You're everything I hoped you'd be, and more. You're brilliant and compassionate and brave. You're exactly the kind of person our mother would have been proud of." The mention of our mother hit me like a physical blow. "Do you remember her?" "Every day. She was a teacher too, actually. Elementary school. She used to say that every child deserved at least one adult who believed in their potential." Elena's voice broke. "I became a teacher because of her. And when I saw your writing, when I recognized that same spark she always talked about, I knew I had to do everything I could to nurture it." We stood there, looking at each other across the classroom, years of separation and secrets finally bridged. I felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time, not just as Ms. Vasquez, the teacher who believed in me, but as Elena, the sister who'd never stopped caring. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. That depends on what you want." I thought about Patricia's dismissal of my dreams, Dad's passive acceptance of her authority, the years I'd spent feeling like I didn't quite belong anywhere. Then I thought about Elena's fierce defense of my potential, her personal investment in my success, the way she'd made me feel seen and valued. "I want my sister back," I said. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. She smelled like vanilla and old books, and her embrace was exactly what I'd been missing without knowing it. "I never stopped being your sister," she whispered, even when I couldn't say it out loud. We held each other in that empty classroom, 2 people who'd lost each other too young and found each other again through the miracle of words and stubbornness and love that refuses to be erased. But even as I reveled in the joy of reclaiming my family, I knew the hard part was just beginning. Patricia and Dad had built their life on the assumption that my past was safely buried. They weren't going to welcome the resurrection of inconvenient truths. Elena seemed to be thinking the same thing. "Zoe, this complicates things. If Patricia finds out I'm your sister, she might try to have me transferred or fired." "Let her try," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "I'm not losing you again." Elena pulled back to look at me, and I saw something new in her expression, pride mixed with determination. "Then we need to be smart about this. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next." I nodded, feeling stronger than I had in years. I wasn't facing Patricia's disapproval alone anymore. I had an ally who understood exactly what was at stake, who'd been fighting for me even before I knew we were fighting the same battle. For the first time since Patricia had married my father, I felt like I had a real family member in my corner. And that changed everything. 3 days after discovering Elena was my sister, I sat at the breakfast table trying to act normal while my entire world had been rewritten. Patricia was scrolling through her phone, occasionally making disapproving sounds at whatever she was reading. Dad mechanically ate his oatmeal, already mentally at the office. Neither of them noticed that I kept glancing at Elena's note, now folded small enough to fit in my wallet. The essay competition deadline was approaching, and I'd submitted everything with Elena's help. But the bigger revelation overshadowed even that accomplishment. Every time I looked at Patricia, I thought about how she'd dismissed me as not her real child, while my actual sister sat across from her, defending my dreams. "Zoe, you're being weird," Patricia said without looking up from her phone. "Stop fidgeting." I realized I'd been tapping my fork against my plate, a nervous habit that always irritated her. "Sorry." "And eat something. You look pale." Dad glanced up at this, taking in my appearance with the kind of delayed attention that suggested he'd been going through the motions of parenting for too long. "You feeling okay, kiddo?" The casual endearment made my chest tight. When had he stopped really seeing me? When had his love become so conditional on keeping Patricia happy? "I'm fine," I said, pushing eggs around my plate. "Just thinking about school stuff." Patricia's attention sharpened. "What kind of school stuff? Please tell me you're not still obsessing over that writing competition." I met her gaze steadily. "Actually, I am. I submitted my essay yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia set down her phone with a kind of deliberate control that meant she was furious, but didn't want to lose her composure in front of Dad. "I thought we agreed that was a waste of time." "You decided it was a waste of time." I disagreed. Dad looked between us with growing alarm. He hated conflict, especially first thing in the morning, and I could see him calculating whether intervention would make things better or worse. "Zoe." Patricia's voice was dangerously quiet. "You deliberately defied me. I made a decision about my own future. That's not defiance, it's independence." The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth, backed by the knowledge that Elena believed in me, that someone who actually knew me thought my dreams were worth fighting for. Patricia's face flushed red. "Independence? You're 17 and living in my house. Everything you do reflects on this family. Then maybe you should want me to succeed instead of expecting me to fail." Dad finally intervened, but predictably he took the path of least resistance. "Girls, let's not start the day with an argument." "This isn't an argument," Patricia said, standing up abruptly. "This is your daughter learning that actions have consequences." She stalked out of the kitchen, leaving her breakfast half finished, and the air crackling with tension. Dad rubbed his temples, a gesture that had become his default response to the emotional landmines of our household. "You know she just wants what's best for you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Does she, Dad? Or does she want what's easiest for her?" He looked genuinely surprised by the question, like it had never occurred to him that Patricia's motivations might be more complex than maternal concern. Patricia loves you, Zoe. She's just protective. She told my guidance counselor I was unrealistic about college. She's actively working against my future. How is that protective? Dad's discomfort was obvious. These were the kinds of conversations he'd been avoiding for years, and I could see him wanting to retreat into his usual pattern of deflection and delay. Can we talk about this later? I'm going to be late for work. We never talk about it later, Dad. We just pretend everything's fine until the next crisis. He paused at the kitchen doorway, and for a moment I thought he might actually engage with the reality of our family dynamic. Instead, he sighed and headed for the garage. I finished my breakfast in silence, thinking about Elena's revelation that she'd fought to keep me after the accident. How different would my life have been if she'd succeeded? If I'd grown up with someone who understood my dreams, instead of someone who saw them as threats to her vision of family stability. At school, I found myself paying attention to Elena in a completely different way. Now that I knew we were sisters, I could see the resemblances I'd missed before. The way she gestured with her hands when she was explaining something complicated. The slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. The unconscious habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. During advanced literature, she announced that we'd be starting a unit on family dynamics in contemporary fiction, and I wondered if she'd planned this timing deliberately. Today we're going to discuss the difference between biological family and chosen family, she said, writing the terms on the whiteboard. Who can give me an example of a character who found belonging outside their blood relatives? Several hands shot up, students eager to discuss the books they'd read. But I found myself thinking about the question more personally. Elena had been my biological family, lost and found again, but she'd also become my chosen family. The person who decided to invest in my future even before revealing our connection. Zoe? Elena's voice drew me back to the discussion. You look like you have thoughts about this topic. I realized the whole class was looking at me expectantly. I was just thinking about how sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally don't, and sometimes the people who have no obligation to care about you end up being the ones who believe in you most. The classroom was quiet for a moment, my classmates processing the unexpected heaviness of my answer. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady when she responded. That's beautifully put, Zoe. And it gets to the heart of what many contemporary authors are exploring. The idea that family isn't just about genetics or legal obligations. It's about recognition, support, and unconditional love. After class, I lingered as other students filed out. Elena closed the door and leaned against her desk, studying my face with the kind of attention that felt like being truly seen. How are you processing everything? She asked. I keep thinking about what you said, about fighting to keep me after the accident. What would have happened if you'd succeeded? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful and sad. I used to imagine that scenario a lot. You and me in a little apartment somewhere. Me working while going to college. You growing up knowing you were loved unconditionally. Instead of growing up feeling like a burden. You're not a burden, Zoe. You never were. The people who made you feel that way were reflecting their own limitations, not your worth. I thought about Patricia's constant reminders that my dreams were impractical, her casual dismissal of my achievements, the way she managed to make me feel grateful for the bare minimum of acceptance. I don't think I realized how bad it was until I had something to compare it to, I said, until I found someone who actually believed in me. Elena's face crumpled slightly. I hate that you've spent all these years feeling unsupported. I hate that I couldn't be there when you needed me. You're here now. That has to count for something. She smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. Zoe, I need you to understand something. If Patricia finds out who I am, this could get complicated quickly. She might try to have me transferred, or she might take her anger out on you at home. Let her try. I'm not afraid of Patricia anymore. You should be careful. People like Patricia don't handle threats to their control well. And make no mistake, you asserting your independence, you having support from someone she can't intimidate, that's a threat to everything she's built. Elena's warning proved prophetic. That afternoon, I came home to find Patricia waiting in the living room with a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. Her posture was rigid, her expression coldly furious. "Sit down, Zoe. We need to have a conversation." I recognized the tone. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a lecture with predetermined conclusions. But I sat down anyway, curious about what had triggered this particular confrontation. "I've been doing some research on this writing competition you entered against my wishes," Patricia began, her voice precisely controlled. "Do you know what the prize is?" "A scholarship and publication in the state anthology. A scholarship to participating colleges and universities. Colleges with creative writing programs. The exact schools I told your guidance counselor you wouldn't be applying to." I felt a flicker of unease. Patricia had clearly spent time planning this ambush. "So you lied to me," she continued. "You pretended to accept my decision about your future while actively working to undermine it." "I didn't lie. I just made my own choices. Choices that directly contradict what we've discussed as a family. What you've dictated as a family. There's a difference." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "I'm trying to save you from disappointment, Zoe. I'm trying to prepare you for the real world. By crushing every dream I have? By making me feel like wanting anything for myself is selfish? By teaching you that success comes from hard work and practical decisions, not from chasing fantasies." I thought about Elena's fierce defense of my potential, her conviction that my dreams were worth pursuing. The contrast with Patricia's relentless pessimism was stark. What if they're not fantasies? What if I'm actually good at this? Patricia leaned forward, her expression almost pitying. "Zoe, thousands of teenagers think they're good at writing. Most of them are wrong. Even if you have some talent, the odds of making a living as a writer are astronomical. So I should just give up? Not even try? You should be realistic. You should choose a career path that will provide stability and security." "Like what? Nursing? Teaching? Something safely feminine and predictable?" Patricia's eyes flashed. "There's nothing wrong with traditionally female careers. They're respectable and stable. There's nothing wrong with them for people who want them, but they're not what I want. What you want is irrelevant if it can't support you." The casual dismissal of my dreams, my preferences, my entire sense of self was breathtaking in its cruelty. But instead of deflating me, it crystallized something that had been building for weeks. "You know what, Patricia? You're right about one thing. What I want is irrelevant to you. It always has been. But it's not irrelevant to me, and it's not irrelevant to people who actually care about my happiness." Patricia went very still. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've found people who believe in me. People who see potential instead of problems." "Are we talking about that teacher again? Ms. Vasquez?" The way she said Elena's name was loaded with disdain, and I felt my protective instincts flare. "We're talking about anyone who thinks I deserve support instead of sabotage." Patricia stood up abruptly, her careful control finally snapping. "I have given you everything, Zoe. A home, food, clothes, stability. And this is how you repay me? By throwing it in my face? You've given me the basics required by law. That doesn't make you a saint. I didn't have to marry your father. I didn't have to take on someone else's traumatized child. I chose to build a life that included you, and you act like that means nothing." The admission hung in the air between us. Finally, the truth, that she saw me as a burden she'd graciously agreed to bear, not a daughter she'd chosen to love. "You're right," I said quietly. "You didn't have to do any of that. And I didn't have to be grateful for being treated like an inconvenience in my own home." Patricia's face went pale, then red. "You ungrateful little, don't." My voice was sharper than I'd ever used with her. "Don't finish that sentence." We stared at each other across the living room, 3 years of suppressed resentment finally in the open. Patricia looked genuinely shocked, like she'd never considered that I might push back against her authority. "Go to your room," she said finally. "We'll finish this conversation when your father gets home." "No, we won't, because Dad will side with you like he always does, and nothing will change except that you'll feel justified in being even more controlling." I headed for the stairs, then paused and looked back. "And Patricia, I'm not withdrawing from the competition. Whatever consequences you think you can impose, they're worth it." I spent the rest of the afternoon in my room, alternating between fury and fear. Patricia had never been physically threatening, but her capacity for emotional manipulation was extensive. She had dozens of ways to make my life more difficult, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to use them. Around 6, I heard Dad's car in the driveway. Within minutes, I could hear raised voices from downstairs, Patricia's clipped, angry tone and Dad's defensive responses. I couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm was familiar. Patricia would present her version of events, Dad would offer weak protests, and eventually, he'd capitulate to whatever she demanded. Sure enough, there was a knock on my door 20 minutes later. "Zoe, can we talk?" Dad's voice carried the weary resignation of someone who'd already decided how this conversation would end. "Come in." He sat on the edge of my bed, looking older than his 45 years. The stress of managing Patricia's expectations and my rebellion was clearly wearing on him. "Patricia told me about your argument today." "I'm sure she did?" "She's concerned that you're being influenced by your teacher, that maybe this Ms. Vasquez is encouraging you to be defiant." I almost laughed at the irony. If only they knew that Elena was encouraging me to believe in myself, not to rebel against authority. "Ms. Vasquez thinks I have talent. She thinks my dreams are worth pursuing." "Is that what Patricia calls defiance?" Dad rubbed his forehead, a gesture that had become his signature move. "It's not that simple, Zoe. Patricia has experience with the real world. She knows how hard it is to make a living in creative fields." "When has Patricia ever tried to make a living in a creative field?" "She works part-time at a boutique because she likes the employee discount." "That's not fair. Patricia has sacrificed a lot to build a stable home for us." "For you and her, I just happen to live here too." Dad looked genuinely hurt by my assessment, and I felt a flicker of guilt. He wasn't a bad person, just a weak one, but his weakness had consequences for both of us. "Zoe, I know things haven't been easy since I married Patricia, but she does care about you. She cares about controlling me. There's a difference. What if we compromise? What if you enter your competition but you also apply to some programs Patricia approves of, just as backup options?" It was such a dad solution. Avoid conflict by giving everyone a little of what they wanted. But I was tired of compromises that required me to give up parts of myself. "I'll consider it," I said, which wasn't really an agreement, but would satisfy his need to feel like he'd negotiated peace. "Thank you." "And Zoe, try to understand Patricia's perspective. She didn't have the advantages you have. She's worked hard for everything, and she wants you to have security." After he left, I sat in the gathering desk of my room, thinking about his words. Patricia had worked hard. I didn't dispute that. But somewhere along the way, she decided that security required crushing anything that looked like risk, including other people's dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How are you holding up? Any fallout from this morning?" I typed back. "Patricia knows about the competition. She's furious but can't actually stop me. Are you okay? Do you need to talk?" The concern in her message made my throat tight. When was the last time someone had asked if I needed to talk without agenda or judgment? "Can I call you tonight? After Patricia and Dad go to bed?" "Of course. I'll be up late grading papers anyway." Having that lifeline, knowing Elena was there if I needed her, made the tension in the house feel more manageable. I wasn't completely alone anymore. Around 10:30, when the house had settled into silence, I called Elena from my bedroom. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and concerned. "Rough day?" I told her about the confrontation with Patricia, about Dad's attempt at mediation, about the growing sense that I was living on borrowed time in my own home. "I'm worried about you," Elena said when I finished. "Patricia sounds like she's escalating." "I can handle Patricia." "I know you can. You're stronger than you know. But Zoe, I want you to understand something. You don't have to handle her alone." "What do you mean?" Elena was quiet for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I mean that if things get bad at home, if Patricia tries to retaliate in ways that hurt you, you have options. You have family who will support you." The word family hit me like a gift I'd been waiting my whole life to receive. "Elena," I said carefully, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" I'm saying that I lost you once, and I'm not losing you again. Whatever that means. Whatever it takes. I closed my eyes, feeling something tight in my chest finally loosen. For the first time in years, I felt like I had someone truly in my corner. Patricia doesn't know about us yet, I said. But what happens when she finds out? We'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, the important thing is that you know you're not alone. After we hung up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, processing the day's revelations. Patricia's mask had finally slipped, revealing the resentment she'd been carrying for years. Dad's weakness had been exposed as the enabling force that allowed her to treat me like a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. But Elena's support felt like armor against their disapproval. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had real family backing me up. The next few days settled into an uneasy truce. Patricia was coldly polite, the kind of artificial courtesy she used when she was planning something. Dad was overly cheerful, working hard to pretend everything was fine. I focused on school, on my writing, on the growing connection with Elena that felt like reclaiming a lost part of myself. But I should have paid more attention to Patricia's silence. I should have recognized it as the calm before the storm. On Friday afternoon, I was called to the principal's office during last period. Mr. Thompson was a decent man, the kind of administrator who genuinely cared about students but sometimes got overwhelmed by the politics of education. "Zoe, please sit down. We need to discuss a concern that's been brought to my attention." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concern?" "It's about your relationship with Ms. Vasquez. There's been a complaint that she's showing you inappropriate favoritism." I felt the blood drain from my face. Who complained? "I can't reveal that information. But the allegation is serious. Preferential treatment, excessive personal attention, possible boundary violations." Each phrase hit like a physical blow. Someone had twisted Elena's mentorship, her belief in my potential, into something ugly and inappropriate. That's not true. Ms. Vasquez has been nothing but professional. She's just encouraging about my writing. I understand your perspective, Zoe. But we have to investigate any allegations involving teacher conduct. I'm going to need to ask you some questions. The next 30 minutes were among the worst of my life. Mr. Thompson's questions, though professionally asked, felt invasive and wrong. Had Ms. Vasquez ever contacted me outside of school? Had she given me special privileges other students didn't receive? Had she ever made comments about my home life that seemed inappropriate? I answered honestly. Yes, Elena had helped me with the essay competition. Yes, she'd been more encouraging than other teachers. Yes, she'd shown interest in my well-being. But hearing my own words reflected back through the lens of suspicion made everything sound sinister. "I want to be clear," Mr. Thompson said finally, "that no one is suggesting anything inappropriate happened. But we do have policies about teacher-student boundaries, and those policies exist to protect everyone involved." So what happens now? Ms. Vasquez will be meeting with me this afternoon to discuss the allegations. Depending on what we find, there may be changes to your class schedule. You'd transfer me out of advanced literature? It's one option we're considering. I left the principal's office feeling sick and furious. Someone had deliberately sabotaged Elena's career and my education. Someone who knew exactly how much advanced literature meant to me, how much Elena's support had changed my life. I didn't need to guess who that someone was. Patricia was already home when I got there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and an expression of false concern. "How was school today, honey?" The endearment felt like acid. "You know exactly how school was." Her mask of innocence didn't slip. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. You called the school. You complained about Ms. Vasquez." Patricia set down her teacup with delicate precision. I expressed some concerns about what seemed like an unhealthy attachment between a teacher and student, as any responsible parent would. "You're not my parent. You're barely my guardian. I'm the adult responsible for your welfare. And when I see a teacher who's clearly overstepping boundaries, it's my duty to intervene." Ms. Vasquez believed in me. She encouraged my dreams. She treated me like I mattered. So you decided to destroy her career? Patricia's composure finally cracked, revealing the cold satisfaction underneath. I decided to protect you from a teacher who was filling your head with unrealistic expectations. Who was encouraging you to disrespect my authority. You decided to punish me for finding someone who actually cared about my future. I decided to remove a negative influence from your life. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I saw Patricia clearly for the first time, not just controlling or practical, but genuinely threatened by anyone who might offer me an alternative to her vision of my future. You're scared, I said, the realization hitting me like lightning. You're scared that if I have other options, I'll choose them over staying here and being grateful for scraps of affection. Patricia's face went white, then red. You're 17 years old. You don't understand how the world works. I understand that you've been systematically isolating me from anyone who might encourage me to want more than you're willing to give. I've been protecting you from disappointment. You've been protecting yourself from losing control. The accusation hung in the air between us, too honest to deny and too dangerous to acknowledge. Go to your room, Patricia said finally. We'll discuss this when your father gets home. But I was done with discussions that ended with Patricia's will imposed through Dad's weakness. No, I said quietly. I'm done pretending this is a normal family having normal disagreements. You tried to destroy Ms. Vasquez's career because she believed in me. That's not protection, Patricia. That's sabotage. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting alone with her tea and her justified cruelty. In my room, I called Elena immediately. I heard, she said before I could speak. Mr. Thompson called me in this afternoon. I'm so sorry, this is all my fault. This is not your fault, Zoe. This is what people like Patricia do when they feel threatened. They attack. Are you going to lose your job? I don't think so. Mr. Thompson is reasonable, and I've done nothing wrong, but they might transfer you to another English class. The thought of losing advanced literature, of losing our daily connection, felt like losing Elena all over again. I won't let them separate us again, I said fiercely. Zoe, listen to me. Patricia has shown you who she really is. She's willing to hurt innocent people to maintain control over you. That's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe it's time to consider other options. You're almost 18. You have choices. Elena's words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. Choices. For so long, I'd felt trapped by circumstances, by Patricia's authority, by Dad's passivity. But Elena was right. I did have choices. And it was time to start making them. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy. The kind of October weather that made everything feel muted and uncertain. I walked into Riverside High knowing that today would determine whether Elena kept her job, whether I'd be allowed to stay in advanced literature, and whether Patricia's vindictive phone call would succeed in destroying the one good thing in my academic life. The hallways felt different somehow, charged with an undercurrent of gossip that made my skin crawl. Small towns thrived on scandal, and a complaint against a popular teacher was exactly the kind of story that spread through whispered conversations and knowing looks. I spotted Iris at my locker, her face tight with concern. I heard about Ms. Vasquez, she said without preamble. My mom knows someone who works in the district office. Is it true someone complained about her? Patricia complained about her, I said, shoving books into my backpack with more force than necessary. She's trying to get Elena transferred because she encouraged my writing. Iris whistled low. That's seriously messed up. Even for Patricia. The bell rang, cutting off our conversation, but I could see the worry in Iris's eyes as we headed to first period. The news was already spreading, which meant Elena was facing not just administrative scrutiny, but public speculation about her professional conduct. I couldn't concentrate during morning classes. My mind kept circling back to the meeting Elena was supposed to have with Mr. Thompson today, to the possibility that Patricia's manipulation might actually work. The thought of losing Elena again, especially through such calculated cruelty, made me feel physically sick. When I arrived at Advanced Literature, Elena was at her desk, grading papers with forced normalcy. She looked up when I entered, and I saw the strain in her eyes despite her professional smile. "Good morning, Zoe. Everyone, please take your seats." Her voice was steady, but I caught the slight tremor underneath. She was scared, and trying not to show it. The other students seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding around them, chattering about weekend plans and upcoming assignments. "Today we're discussing the concept of justice in literature," Elena announced, writing the word on the whiteboard. "Who can give me an example of a character who sought justice when the system failed them?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Elena, facing false accusations designed to destroy her career, teaching us about characters who fought corrupt systems. Several hands went up, students eager to discuss their favorite novels about underdogs and rebels. "What about when the system is designed to protect the wrong people?" I asked, my voice carrying more emotion than I'd intended. Elena paused, chalk halfway to the board. "That's an interesting question, Zoe. Can you elaborate? Sometimes the people with power use that power to silence the people who threaten their control. And the system protects them because they know how to work it." The classroom was quiet, my classmates sensing the personal edge to my words even if they didn't understand the context. "That's a sophisticated observation," Elena said carefully. "Many authors have explored how institutional power can be weaponized against individuals who challenge the status quo. But what happens to those individuals? Do they just accept it? Or do they find other ways to fight back?" Elena set down her chalk and looked directly at me. "The best characters, the ones we remember, find ways to expose the truth. They refuse to be silenced, even when silence would be easier." Our eyes met across the classroom, and I understood the message she was sending. Whatever happened with the investigation, whatever Patricia had set in motion, Elena wasn't going to disappear quietly. After class, I approached her desk as other students filed out. "How did it go with Mr. Thompson?" Elena glanced toward the door, making sure we were alone. "He's a fair man, but he has to follow protocol. There's going to be a formal review process." "What does that mean?" "It means a committee will examine the complaint, interview relevant parties, and make recommendations about whether any policies were violated." My stomach dropped. "How long does that take?" "Could be weeks, maybe longer." Elena's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the exhaustion underneath. "Zoe, I need you to understand something. Even if this gets resolved in my favor, things might have to change between us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Patricia has put a spotlight on our relationship. Even if the committee finds no wrongdoing, I'll have to be extra careful about any appearance of favoritism or boundary violations." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Patricia hadn't just tried to destroy Elena's career. She'd poisoned the well, making it dangerous for Elena to continue supporting me even if she kept her job. "She's going to win either way," I said, the realization bitter in my mouth. "Not if we're smarter than she is." Elena's tone carried a new edge, something that reminded me she wasn't just my teacher but my sister, with her own history of fighting for what mattered. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Patricia made a mistake. She assumed I'd be intimidated by her complaint, that I'd back down and distance myself from you. But she doesn't know who I really am." There was steel in Elena's voice that I'd never heard before, and I felt a flicker of hope. "You're gonna fight this?" "I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect you and clear my name." "Patricia wants to play games?" "Fine. But she's not the only one who knows how to work the system." Elena's words stayed with me through the rest of the day, but it was hard to feel optimistic when I knew what I was walking home to. Patricia would be waiting, probably with some new consequence designed to punish me for Elena's refusal to disappear quietly. Sure enough, she was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, surrounded by printouts and official-looking documents. "Sit down, Zoe. We need to discuss your future." The formal tone suggested this wasn't going to be a conversation but a pronouncement. I sat down reluctantly, eyeing the papers spread across the table. "I've been in contact with the guidance office at Riverside Community College," Patricia began, shuffling through the documents. "They have an excellent practical nursing program that starts in January." "I'm not interested in nursing." You're interested in financial security, whether you realize it or not. I've also spoken with the manager at the medical office where I used to work. They're willing to offer you a part-time position while you complete your prerequisites. I stared at the course catalogs and job applications, feeling like Patricia was showing me a prison sentence disguised as opportunity. I haven't even graduated high school yet, which is why we need to plan ahead. No more fantasy competitions or unrealistic college dreams. It's time to focus on practical goals. What if I win the writing competition? Patricia's smile was cold and satisfied. You won't. The certainty in her voice made my blood run cold. What did you do? I contacted the competition organizers, explained that your essay was submitted without proper parental consent, since you're still a minor. They were very understanding about withdrawing your entry. The words hit me like a physical blow. All the work Elena and I had put into the application, all the hope I'd been carrying, destroyed with a single phone call. You can't do that. I'm almost 18. But you're not 18 yet. And as your legal guardian, I have the right to make decisions about your participation in activities that could affect your future. Like activities that might help me succeed? Like activities that encourage unrealistic expectations. I felt something break inside me, some last fragile hope that Patricia might eventually support my dreams. She hadn't just sabotaged Elena's career, she'd systematically destroyed every path to the future I wanted. I hate you, I said quietly, the words carrying all the weight of years of accumulated resentment. Patricia's composure didn't waver. You'll thank me someday when you have a stable career and financial security. I'll never thank you for killing my dreams. Dreams don't pay the bills, Zoe. Reality does. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still while she calmly described the cage she'd built around my future. Where are you going? Away from you. You'll be back for dinner, and when your father gets home, we're going to discuss your new course schedule and work arrangements. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to speak without screaming. Outside, the October air was sharp and clean, a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the house. I walked without direction, letting my feet carry me through the familiar streets of Riverside while my mind reeled with the scope of Patricia's betrayal. She'd withdrawn my essay from the competition. The essay that represented everything I'd worked for, everything Elena had helped me achieve. The essay that might have been my ticket to the future I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Can you meet me at the corner cafe? I have news. I changed direction, heading toward downtown. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing coffee and reading newspapers. Elena was sitting at a corner table, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. You look like you've been hit by a truck, she said as I slumped into the opposite chair. Patricia withdrew my essay from the competition. She called them and said I didn't have parental consent. Elena's face went white, then red with fury. She did what? I explained Patricia's latest manipulation, watching Elena's expression grow more dangerous with each detail. That vindictive, controlling. Elena stopped herself, taking a deep breath. Okay, this changes things. What do you mean? I mean, Patricia just escalated this beyond school politics. She's actively sabotaging your future, and that's something we can document. Elena pulled out her phone and opened the voice recorder app. Tell me everything. Every detail about what Patricia said, how she said it, when it happened. We're going to create a record of her behavior. For the next hour, I recounted not just today's conversation, but years of Patricia's systematic undermining. Elena asked careful questions, helping me articulate patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. Zoe, what I'm hearing describes emotional abuse, financial control, isolation from support systems, deliberate sabotage of your goals. These aren't normal parenting strategies. Hearing it labeled as abuse was both validating and terrifying. I'd known Patricia's behavior was wrong, but I'd always assumed it was just her personality, her way of showing love through control. What can we do about it? Several things. First, I'm going to contact the competition organizers myself. As your teacher and the person who helped you prepare the application, I may be able to challenge Patricia's withdrawal. Hope fluttered in my chest. You think they'll listen? It's worth trying. But Zoe, there's something else we need to discuss. Something I found out today. Elena's expression was serious, almost grim. What? I did some research into Patricia's complaint against me. It turns out she didn't just call the school. She filed formal complaints with the district office and the state teaching board. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means she's trying to destroy my career completely, not just get me transferred. The state board complaint could result in me losing my teaching license permanently. The scope of Patricia's vindictiveness was staggering. She wasn't just trying to control my future, she was willing to destroy Elena's life to do it. This is all my fault, I said, guilt crushing down on me. If I hadn't entered the competition, if I hadn't pushed back. Stop. Elena's voice was sharp. This is not your fault. This is what abusers do when their control is threatened. They escalate. But you're paying the price for my rebellion. I'm paying the price for Patricia's inability to handle being challenged. And Zoe, I want you to understand something. I'd make the same choices again. Supporting you, believing in your dreams, helping you find your voice. That's worth fighting for. Tears were running down my cheeks, but for the first time in days, they weren't entirely tears of despair. What happens now? Elena leaned forward, her expression fierce and determined. Now we stop playing defense and start playing offense. Patricia wants a war? Fine, but she picked the wrong people to mess with. What do you mean? I mean, it's time to tell the truth. All of it. Who I really am. Why I came back to Riverside. What Patricia is really trying to protect. My heart started racing. You want to tell them we're sisters? I want to expose Patricia's abuse and show the community exactly what kind of person they're dealing with. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to shine a light on their behavior. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. For years I'd kept Patricia's treatment of me private, partly from shame and partly from fear of making things worse. But Elena was right. Secrecy was protecting Patricia, not me. How do we do it? Elena smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the fierce protectiveness that had made her fight to keep me after our mother's death. We start with the truth, and we make sure everyone hears it. That evening I returned home to find Dad waiting in the living room, his expression troubled and confused. Patricia was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear her voice drifting from the kitchen, sharp and angry as she talked on the phone. Zoe, sit down. We need to talk. Dad's tone was different from his usual conflict avoidance mode. He looked genuinely upset, like he'd finally been forced to confront something he'd been ignoring. Patricia told me about the competition, about withdrawing your essay. Quote, "Are you here to lecture me about accepting her decision?" Actually, I'm here to apologize. The words caught me completely off guard. Dad had never apologized for Patricia's behavior before. What? He rubbed his forehead, that familiar gesture of stress and confusion. I called the competition office myself today. I wanted to understand what Patricia had done. And I talked to the coordinator, a woman named Dr. Martinez. She said your essay was exceptional, one of the strongest entries they'd received this year. I felt a flicker of the hope Patricia had tried to crush. She also said something else. She said the teacher who helped you submit it called today, asking about the withdrawal. She vouched for your talent and your maturity, said you were one of the most promising young writers she'd encountered. Dad was watching my face carefully, and I could see him putting pieces together. This teacher who believes in you so much, she seems to care about you as more than just a student. I held my breath, wondering how much he'd figured out. Patricia thinks she's a bad influence, but everything I heard today suggests the opposite. Dr. Martinez spoke about her with tremendous respect. Said she was known in academic circles for her integrity and her advocacy for student potential. She is a good teacher, Dad. She's the only adult who's ever made me feel like my dreams matter. Dad was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with uncomfortable realizations. Zoe, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be completely honest. Has Patricia's behavior toward you been appropriate? As a parent figure? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to face. What do you mean? I mean that I've been thinking about some things Dr. Martinez said, about how important it is for young people to have adults who believe in their potential. And I've been wondering if Patricia and I have been doing that for you. It was the closest Dad had ever come to acknowledging that something was wrong with our family dynamic. Dad, I said carefully, do you remember what Patricia said at the parent conference? About me not being her real child? His face went pale. She told me you misunderstood what she meant. I didn't misunderstand anything. She meant exactly what she said. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing what was best for you. After your mother died, after everything fell apart, I thought you needed stability more than anything else. I needed love, Dad. Unconditional love. The kind that celebrates who I am instead of trying to change me into someone more convenient. And you haven't felt that? From us? I looked at this man who'd raised me. This gentle person who'd somehow lost his way in the maze of Patricia's expectations and his own grief. I've felt it from you sometimes, but never from Patricia. And lately, not even from you when you side with her against me. Dad's eyes filled with tears, and I saw him truly understand for the first time what his passivity had cost both of us. I'm sorry, Zoe. I'm so sorry. Patricia chose that moment to appear in the doorway, her phone call apparently finished. She took in the scene. Dad's tears, my defiant posture, and her face hardened. I hope you're not filling her head with more unrealistic expectations, David. Actually, Dad said, standing up with more authority than I'd seen from him in years. I'm trying to understand when supporting our daughter's dreams became unrealistic. Patricia's carefully controlled expression faltered. We've discussed this. Zoe needs practical guidance, not false encouragement. What if it's not false? What if she really does have exceptional talent? Then she'll be a very talented person with an impractical degree and no job prospects. Or she'll be a successful writer who followed her passion and found her purpose. I stared at Dad in amazement. He was actually standing up to Patricia, actually defending my dreams. David, you're being naive. And you're being controlling. The words landed like a slap. Patricia's face went white, then red with fury, though I haven't used Vasquez professionally since I moved back to Oregon. You're my sister. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Half-sister, she corrected, then immediately looked stricken. Not that it matters. You're my sister in every way that counts. Other students were starting to filter into the classroom, so she stood up quickly. Can you stay after class? We need to talk. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The rest of the class period passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on the discussion of symbolism in contemporary fiction when my entire understanding of my life had just been rewritten. Elena kept glancing at me throughout the lesson, her professional composure intact, but her eyes filled with anxiety. When the bell rang and the last student left, she closed the door and leaned against it like she was bracing for impact. How did you find out? I told her about the late-night phone call with Janet, about the internet searches and the inconsistencies I'd noticed. As I spoke, I watched her face cycle through relief, fear, and something that looked like grief. I've wanted to tell you since the first day you walked into my classroom, she said when I finished. But I was terrified. Of what? Of disrupting your life. Of making things more complicated with Patricia and your father. Of you hating me for abandoning you. You didn't abandon me. You were 14 and traumatized. You were a kid yourself. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. I tried to fight to keep you. After I got out of the hospital, I begged my aunt to let me bring you with us. But your father had already married Patricia, and everyone said you needed stability, not a teenage sister who was still dealing with her own trauma. I thought about the years I'd spent feeling like an outsider in my own home, wondering why Patricia's love felt so conditional. All that time, my real family had been grieving my absence too. Why did you come back to Riverside? Why become my teacher? I'd been teaching in Portland for 3 years when I saw the job posting here. I told myself it was just a good opportunity, but honestly, I needed to know you were okay. I needed to see the person you'd become. And? She smiled through her tears. "You're extraordinary, Zoe. You're everything I hoped you'd be, and more. You're brilliant and compassionate and brave. You're exactly the kind of person our mother would have been proud of." The mention of our mother hit me like a physical blow. "Do you remember her?" "Every day. She was a teacher too, actually. Elementary school. She used to say that every child deserved at least one adult who believed in their potential." Elena's voice broke. "I became a teacher because of her. And when I saw your writing, when I recognized that same spark she always talked about, I knew I had to do everything I could to nurture it." We stood there, looking at each other across the classroom, years of separation and secrets finally bridged. I felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time, not just as Ms. Vasquez, the teacher who believed in me, but as Elena, the sister who'd never stopped caring. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. That depends on what you want." I thought about Patricia's dismissal of my dreams, Dad's passive acceptance of her authority, the years I'd spent feeling like I didn't quite belong anywhere. Then I thought about Elena's fierce defense of my potential, her personal investment in my success, the way she'd made me feel seen and valued. "I want my sister back," I said. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. She smelled like vanilla and old books, and her embrace was exactly what I'd been missing without knowing it. "I never stopped being your sister," she whispered, even when I couldn't say it out loud. We held each other in that empty classroom, 2 people who'd lost each other too young and found each other again through the miracle of words and stubbornness and love that refuses to be erased. But even as I reveled in the joy of reclaiming my family, I knew the hard part was just beginning. Patricia and Dad had built their life on the assumption that my past was safely buried. They weren't going to welcome the resurrection of inconvenient truths. Dad looked up and managed a tired smile. "Morning, kiddo. How did you sleep?" "Fine." I poured myself orange juice, hyper-aware of Patricia's silence. She was radiating fury, but it was a different kind than usual. Less controlled, more desperate. "Zoe," Dad said, "I want you to know that I called Dr. Martinez again yesterday evening. I asked her to put your essay back into consideration for the competition. I nearly dropped my glass." "You did what?" "I explained that the withdrawal was made without consulting you, and that as your father, I wanted to support your participation." Patricia slammed a plate into the dish rack so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter. "David, we discussed this." "No, Patricia, you told me your decision. I'm telling you mine." The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut. I looked between them, seeing the battle lines that had finally been drawn. "What did Dr. Martinez say?" I asked. "She said the deadline had passed, but given the unusual circumstances, the committee would review your case." She seemed very hopeful. For the first time in days, I felt something like joy. My essay might still have a chance. "Thank you, Dad. Don't thank me yet. I should have stood up for you a long time ago." Patricia turned around, her face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. "You have no idea what you're doing, David. You're encouraging her to chase fantasies that will only lead to disappointment." "I'm encouraging our daughter to pursue her talents. There's a difference. She's not our daughter, she's your daughter. And apparently, I'm the only one who cares enough about her future to be realistic." The familiar refrain stung less than it used to. I'd heard Patricia's version of love so many times that it had lost its power to hurt me. "Patricia," I said quietly, "your version of caring looks a lot like sabotage. And your version of realism looks a lot like giving up." She stared at me with genuine shock, like she couldn't believe I was still fighting back after everything she'd done. "You ungrateful." "I'm not ungrateful. I'm just done pretending that your fear of my success is somehow for my own good." Dad was watching this exchange with growing awareness, like he was finally seeing the dynamic that had been playing out under his nose for years. "Patricia," he said slowly, "why are you so afraid of Zoe succeeding?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to have no ready answer. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. "I'll see you both tonight." "Zoe," Dad called after me. "Be careful today." I wasn't sure if he was talking about school politics or something deeper, but I nodded and headed out into the morning air. At school, news of Elena's meeting with Mr. Thompson had spread through the unofficial teacher network. I could see colleagues watching her with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. But Elena moved through the hallways with calm professionalism. In advanced literature, she seemed different, more settled, like she'd made peace with whatever was coming. "Today we're going to discuss truth-telling in literature," she announced, and I felt my pulse quicken. "Specifically, we're going to examine characters who choose to expose difficult truths, despite personal cost." The lesson felt like preparation for what was about to happen. Elena guided us through examples of whistleblowers, rebels, and truth-tellers, characters who'd chosen integrity over safety. "What motivates someone to tell the truth when silence would be easier?" she asked the class. A student named Marcus raised his hand. "Maybe because living with a lie becomes harder than facing the consequences of honesty." "Excellent point, Marcus. What else?" "Sometimes the truth needs to be told to protect other people," offered Sarah, a quiet girl who rarely spoke in class. Elena nodded approvingly. "Both excellent observations. Anyone else?" I raised my hand, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Sometimes you realize that your silence is protecting the wrong people." Elena's eyes met mine across the classroom, and I saw pride and love and fierce determination. "That's beautifully put, Zoe. Can you elaborate?" Quote, "Sometimes we keep secrets to avoid conflict or protect feelings, but we end up enabling people who hurt others. At some point, speaking up becomes a moral obligation." The classroom was unusually quiet, my words carrying a weight that went beyond academic discussion. "Truth-telling requires courage," Elena said, "but it also requires wisdom, knowing when silence serves justice and when it serves injustice." After class, she asked me to stay behind. "Are you ready for this?" I thought about Patricia's escalating control, about the years I'd spent feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own life, about all the other kids who might be trapped in similar situations. "I'm ready. Mr. Thompson wants to meet with both of us at lunch. I'm going to tell him everything. Who I am, why I came back, what Patricia has been doing." "What do you think will happen?" "I don't know, but I know that staying silent hasn't protected either of us." The morning dragged by with excruciating slowness. During my free period, I sat in the library and wrote out everything I wanted to say, organizing my thoughts and emotions into coherent arguments. At lunch, Elena and I walked to the main office together. Mr. Thompson was waiting in his conference room along with Mrs. Henderson from Guidance and Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the district's student advocacy coordinator. "Thank you both for coming," Mr. Thompson said as we sat down. "Ms. Vasquez, you indicated you had additional information relevant to the complaint filed against you." Elena took a deep breath. "Yes, but it's complicated. The information involves my personal history and my relationship with Zoe." She looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. 17 years ago, I was Elena Vasquez, a 14-year-old girl who survived a car accident that killed my stepmother. That stepmother was Maria Caldwell, and Zoe is my half-sister. The silence in the room was profound. I watched the adults process this information, saw the implications dawn on their faces. "You're saying you're related to Zoe?" Mrs. Henderson asked carefully. "I'm saying I'm her sister. And I came back to Riverside specifically to check on her well-being. What I found was a pattern of emotional abuse and systematic undermining by her stepmother, Patricia Caldwell." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. "That's a serious allegation, Ms. Vasquez. Can you provide specifics?" For the next hour, Elena and I laid out everything. Patricia's withdrawal of my essay, her complaints designed to destroy Elena's career, her years of making me feel like a burden, her active sabotage of my dreams and goals. I showed them the recording Elena had helped me make, played excerpts of Patricia's most damaging statements. I described the isolation, the constant criticism, the way Patricia had convinced Dad that supporting my dreams was somehow harmful to me. "Ms. Vasquez," Mr. Thompson said when we'd finished, "why didn't you reveal your relationship with Zoe from the beginning?" "Because I was afraid. I was afraid that if Patricia knew who I was, she'd find a way to remove me from Zoe's life again. I was afraid that my presence would make things worse for Zoe at home." And now I realize that my silence was protecting Patricia, not Zoe. The situation has escalated to the point where intervention is necessary. Dr. Mitchell had been taking notes throughout our presentation. What outcome are you hoping for? Elena and I looked at each other. I want the complaints against Ms. Vasquez dropped, I said. She's done nothing wrong except believe in a student's potential. And I want Zoe to have the support she needs to pursue her dreams safely, Elena added. Whether that's in her current home situation or an alternative arrangement. The implications of her words were clear. If necessary, Elena was prepared to fight for custody. This is a complex situation, Mr. Thompson said finally. We'll need to review all the information you've provided and consult with our legal team about the appropriate next steps. What happens in the meantime? I asked. In the meantime, the complaint against Ms. Vasquez is suspended pending further investigation, and Dr. Mitchell will be reaching out to social services to ensure your safety and well-being. As we left the conference room, I felt lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally out, and adults with authority were taking it seriously. How do you feel? Elena asked as we walked down the hallway. Scared. Relieved. Hopeful. I paused. How do you feel? Like I can finally breathe. That afternoon, word spread quickly through the small community of Riverside. By the time I got home, Patricia was waiting with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. How dare you? She said before I'd even closed the front door. How dare you air our private family business to strangers? How dare you file false complaints against my teacher? She manipulated you. She filled your head with lies about our family. She told me the truth about my potential. You're the one who's been lying. Dad appeared from the kitchen, his face grim but resolute. Patricia, we need to talk. We need to talk? Our daughter just humiliated us in front of the entire school district, and you think we need to talk? She's not our daughter, remember? You made that very clear yesterday. Patricia's face went white. You know that's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly how you've treated her for 3 years. I looked at Dad with new respect. Whatever internal battle he'd been fighting, he'd finally chosen a side. David, you're letting that teacher manipulate you just like she manipulated Zoe. Patricia, I found out today who that teacher really is. Elena Vasquez is Zoe's sister. Patricia's shock was complete and devastating. She stared between us, her mouth opening and closing as she processed the implications. That's impossible. Zoe's sister died in the accident. No, I said quietly. She survived. She's been taking care of me from a distance for years, and when she had the chance to be part of my life again, she took it. She's been lying to us. To the school. She manipulated her way into your life. She's been protecting me from you. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Patricia looked at me with genuine hatred, all pretense of maternal concern finally abandoned. You want to know the truth? Fine. I never wanted you here. I married your father in spite of you, not because of you. I've spent 3 years trying to turn you into someone I could tolerate, and this is how you repay me. Patricia, stop. Dad's voice was sharp with warning. No, David. She wants honesty? She can have it. I've sacrificed my peace, my comfort, my vision of our life together for an ungrateful child who's never appreciated anything I've done. What have you done except make me feel unwanted in my own home? I've given you structure, discipline, reality checks when you needed them. You've given me criticism and control and conditional acceptance. Because that's what you needed. Someone to prepare you for disappointment instead of filling your head with fantasies. Dad stepped between us, his patience finally exhausted. Patricia, that's enough. You're talking about my daughter, and I won't let you speak to her that way anymore. Your daughter who just destroyed my reputation? Your daughter who's been working with that manipulative teacher to undermine our family? Our family was already broken, Patricia. Zoe just had the courage to say it out loud. Patricia looked between us, finally understanding that her authority was completely gone. Fine. You want to side with her against me? Choose her dreams over our marriage. Fine. But don't come crying to me when reality hits and you realize I was right all along. She stormed upstairs, and Dad and I stood in the sudden silence. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. You see it now, that's what matters. What happens next? I don't know, but for the first time in years, I feel like I have choices. That evening, Elena called with news. Dr. Martinez called me directly. The competition committee reviewed your case and decided to reinstate your essay. Not only that, but they're expediting the judging process. What does that mean? It means you'll know the results by Friday, instead of waiting until December. My heart was racing. Elena, what if I don't win? Then you'll have taken a shot at something you believed in. And that's victory enough. 3 days later, I was sitting in advanced literature when a student aide knocked on the door with a message for me. Mr. Thompson wanted to see me in his office immediately. My stomach dropped. Had Patricia found a way to retaliate? Had the social services investigation gone badly? Elena caught my eye as I gathered my things. Whatever it is, we'll handle it. In the principal's office, I found not just Mr. Thompson, but Dr. Martinez herself, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Zoe, Mr. Thompson said with a smile, I'd like you to meet Dr. Martinez from the state writing competition. Dr. Martinez stood up and extended her hand. Congratulations, Zoe. Your essay won first place. The words didn't compute at first. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd said. I won? You won. Your essay, The Space Between Belonging, was unanimously selected by our judges. The writing is exceptional, but more than that, it's brave. It speaks truth with the kind of courage we rarely see from writers of any age. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy. What does this mean? It means a full scholarship to any of our participating universities. It means publication in our national anthology. It means recognition as one of the most promising young writers in the country. Dr. Martinez handed me an official certificate and a packet of information about scholarship options. Your teacher spoke very highly of you when she called about the reinstatement. She said you were the kind of student who made teaching worthwhile. Where is Ms. Vasquez? I asked. She should be here any moment. We wanted to surprise you both. Elena appeared in the doorway, her face bright with anticipation and anxiety. Elena, Dr. Martinez said warmly, congratulations. Your student just achieved something remarkable. Elena's face transformed as she understood what had happened. She crossed the room and pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, so incredibly proud. That afternoon, Elena and I sat in the corner cafe again, this time celebrating instead of strategizing. I can't believe it's real, I said, staring at the certificate and scholarship materials. It's real because you made it real. You wrote from your heart, you fought for your dreams, and you refused to let anyone silence your voice. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have. You're stronger than you know. I just helped you remember that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing how dramatically our lives had changed in just 1 week. Elena, I said finally, what happens now? With Patricia, with our family situation? Well, the good news is that the complaint against me has been officially dropped. The district reviewed all the evidence and concluded that Patricia's allegations were unfounded and potentially malicious. And the bad news? There is no bad news. Patricia overplayed her hand. Her attempt to destroy my career backfired spectacularly, and now everyone can see her true character. What about Dad? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. Your father called me yesterday. He wanted to apologize for Patricia's behavior and to thank me for protecting you when he couldn't. Are they getting divorced? I don't know, but I do know that he's finally seeing Patricia clearly, and he's not willing to let her continue treating you badly. And us? What happens with us? Elena smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. We're sisters, Zoe. We've always been sisters. Now we just get to act like it. 2 weeks later, I sat in my new bedroom at Elena's downtown apartment, surrounded by boxes of books and the scholarship materials I'd been reading and rereading. Dad had agreed to let me move in with Elena while we worked out the details of my new life. Patricia had moved out of the house temporarily, claiming she needed space to, quote, reevaluate her priorities. Dad seemed relieved by her absence, like he could finally breathe in his own home. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Iris. "How's the new place?" "Amazing. Elena has about 1,000 books, and she says I can read all of them." "And how are you feeling about everything?" I considered the question. A month ago, I'd been trapped in a house where my dreams were seen as inconveniences. Now I was living with someone who celebrated my potential and planning for a future that felt limitless. I feel like myself for the first time in years. "That's amazing, Zoe. You deserve to be happy." After we hung up, I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. The scholarship required an additional essay about overcoming challenges, and I knew exactly what I wanted to write about. I started typing, "Sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally don't. Sometimes the people who have no obligation to care about you end up being the ones who believe in you most. And sometimes, the family you're born with isn't the family that saves you." I wrote about Patricia's systematic undermining, about Dad's well-meaning but inadequate protection, about the years I'd spent feeling like a burden. But mostly I wrote about Elena, about the sister I'd lost and found again, about the teacher who'd seen my potential when I'd almost forgotten it myself, about the courage it takes to fight for someone else's dreams. As I wrote, I thought about all the other kids who might be living in houses where their dreams were seen as threats, where their potential was minimized by people who claimed to love them. I thought about the essay competition and the platform it had given me to tell my story. When I finished writing, I walked to the kitchen where Elena was grading papers at the small table by the window. "Done already?" she asked, looking up from a stack of essays. "I want to do more than just write about this. I want to help other kids who are dealing with what I dealt with." Elena set down her pen and gave me her full attention. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about starting a support group. A place where teenagers can talk about family situations that aren't healthy, where they can get help figuring out their options." Elena's face lit up with pride and excitement. "That's a beautiful idea, Zoe. And you know what? I think I know some people who might want to help." 6 months later, I stood in front of a room full of teenagers at the Riverside Community Center, leading my third meeting of Finding Your Voice, the support group Elena and I had created for kids dealing with family manipulation and control. "Remember," I told the group, "your dreams matter, your voice matters, and you deserve to be loved for who you are, not who someone else thinks you should be." A girl named Ashley raised her hand. "What if the people who should support you are the ones trying to stop you? Then you find new people. You build the family you need instead of accepting the family that hurts you. How do you do that?" I looked around the room at these brave kids who'd had the courage to seek help, who'd refused to accept that their dreams were too big or too impractical. You start by refusing to be silent. You start by telling your story. You start by believing that you deserve better. After the meeting, Elena and I walked home through the warm spring evening. "You know," she said, "I'm pretty sure our mother would be proud of both of us." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said that the best way to honor love is to pass it on." I thought about the teenagers in our support group, about the scholarship that would let me study journalism and creative writing, about the essay collection I was working on about family trauma and recovery. "Elena," I said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Patricia had succeeded? If she'd managed to stop me from submitting that essay?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you would have found another way. Maybe not that particular competition, but something else. Because people like you, people with real talent and determination, they don't stay buried forever." "People like us, you mean?" "People like us," she agreed, and squeezed my hand. As we walked up the steps to our apartment, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life being lived authentically. Patricia's version of reality, the one where dreams were dangerous and wanting more was selfish, had been exposed as the lie it always was. I'd found my voice, reclaimed my family, and discovered that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept less than you deserve. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Saw your interview in the local paper about the support group. I'm proud of you, kiddo." I smiled and showed the message to Elena. See? She said. Love has a way of finding its way back to the light. That night, I sat at my desk working on my latest essay. This one, about the difference between people who diminish your light and people who help you shine brighter. Outside my window, Riverside looked the same as it always had, but everything else had changed. I was no longer the girl who accepted scraps of affection and called it love. I was no longer the daughter who apologized for taking up space in her own life. I was Zoe Caldwell, scholarship winner, support group leader, and most importantly, beloved sister to Elena Vasquez. The woman who taught me that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to disappear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.